Hi, welcome. I'm Zara Altair, and this is Mystery Monday, where we chat about mysteries. And today, I want to focus on making your reader a detective. So, you hear me talk a lot about your reader, and boy, I'm telling you, they are the lifeblood of any author. So you want to draw your reader into the story, and actually you're making them the number one detective. So there are quite a few ways that you can do this. You want to give the reader an active part in solving the mystery, the most active part that they can. So the first thing, of course, is to leave clues throughout your story. You don't want to make them too blatant because you don't want them to figure it out before the detective figures it out. So you can leave those clues about the murderer's identity, but not too obvious. They need to be scattered throughout the book, or else they won't feel like it was fair. And if you put them all at the end, that's going to feel like a cheat. But on the other hand, they don't need a giant blinking neon sign. I mean, readers are smart, especially mystery readers. They've read a lot of mysteries. So it's going to be a challenge to plant your clues without, making them obvious. And then, of course, the other thing is to use red herrings. Those are the clues that need anywhere. They send the detective off on a wild goose chase. But the reader doesn't know that yet, and neither does your sleuth. So you want to keep that reader reading. And then you can do this also with how you present the other characters in your mystery. You can include characters who are truthful and characters who lie, and it's up to the reader and your sleuth to figure out which is which. So they're going to give your detective and your reader detective problems about figuring out what's going on. And then have multiple explanations. So in a murder mystery, that means having multiple suspicious characters. And we talked about on the previous episode about making your characters have secrets and making those little puzzles that your reader and your sleuth have to figure out. So that is part of the complication. So writing a mystery has a lot of complications in it because you have a regular storyline, but you also have all these little places along the way where the detective is trying to figure things out, and so is your reader. And then the other thing is make your sleuth someone the reader likes and they root for. They may be a son of a gun with the other characters in your story, but you have to make your sleuth likable enough that the reader is emotionally attached to your sleuth. So don't make them too perfect. And there's several ways that you can add some flaws to your detectives to make him or her more likable. And the first is some kind of psychological problem that they have. They may have a fear of abandonment, or a fear of spiders even, or they may have quite a temper. So when someone pushes the sleuth buttons, they lose their temper. Um, and then there are physical physical setbacks, such as something as totally obvious as being blind, uh, or age. They may be too young to have a lot of life experience, or they may be at the other end of the age spectrum and not be able to run or catch up with a suspect. And then there are also moral flaws. They can be amoral, they could be a womanizer, they could be terribly self righteous. And these are all flaws in your sleuth that make them feel more real. A goody two shoes, I can't talk. A goody two shoes sleuth is going to put your readers off. They want someone who has some depth and dimension. So I hope those little tips will help you think about bringing your reader into your story and making them a detective right along with your sleuth in your story. So, I lost my train of thought. Um, Readers. That was it. It was like, I can't stress the importance of readers when you're writing your first mystery. Readers are the lifeblood of authors, and you want your readers, especially in mysteries, you want them to go right along with you in finding the clues and solving the mystery and keeping them um, wondering about who it was and how it really happened. You want to keep that wonder in your story, because at the end, when you publish your mystery, you want to garner those 4 and 5 stars reviews, and that's definitely a way that helps readers engage with your book and write those reviews, and all the algorithms. Okay, so first question I have is, my book was rejected by an agent. She said my writing was good, but my detective was too good. Okay, so we just talked about that, and that is, just again to review, there are 3 major ways that you can, give your character not such a goody two shoes feeling. And those are physical things like a disease that they're fighting in some way, or a physical handicap, or being young and inexperienced, or being old and not able to perform a physical task. And actually, last year I ghost wrote a story for someone in their 80s. So everyone is fair game. You just want to have those defects in your sleuth that makes them more engaging and more human for your readers. And then there are psychological things like, I think this one is overdone, being an alcoholic, or a fear of abandonment, which can come up in subplots where they meet someone of the opposite sex and they just can't connect. They just can't connect. So, and then moral defects, um, like something they did in the past that was really wrong, or they're very, very self-righteous, so they keep putting people down and thinking that their way is the only way. But that is a really good question, and I, I think your agent was right to give you that tip. So if you want to go back and look at your sleuth and give him or her, some psychological, physical, or moral. It doesn't have to be all three, it can be only one, but something that limits them and bring those limitations into your story. It'll make it much more engaging for your reader. Um, and those limitations, whatever they are, also create obstacles in your storyline. So you get to play when you're looking at your storyline. You can bring up those defects from time to time, um, and create some situations for your reader. All right. Well, for your reader, the detective, and for your own detective. So, okay, next question. Let's see here. I started writing a mystery and now I'm stuck. I'm not even halfway through the story. Well, this happens with writers. It happens with story writers, and it can particularly happen writing mysteries, because mysteries really take some planning. I know there are some people who write by the seat of their pants who disagree with me, but for most people, writing mysteries, planning is the backbone of pulling your story together. So if you're stuck, you probably want to go back and look at ways you can amplify your story. This happens a lot in the middle of the story, both before the midpoint and after the midpoint. Um, so you can avoid a lot of rewriting, which can happen when you just kind of wing it, um, by outlining your story. And at least start with the major beats of your story, like the inciting incident, the thing that pulls your sleuth into this particular case, um, the crisis in the middle where something happens that mirrors the end, um, and work on the confrontation with the killer so you can go back through your story and bring up points that point toward that particular suspect as the main subject. Um, so just some basic story writing things about pulling it all together is, there's a traditional way of using 3x5 cards and doing one for each scene. So you end up with quite a stack of 3x5 cards, and then you can um, put them on a cork board, or lay them out on the floor, however you want to do. So you organize it, always keeping in mind that you want to increase the tension and make the obstacles toward the end of your story more difficult than the ones at the beginning. That just gets, momentum going and keeps that reader right where you want them with your story. There are also software like Scrivener has digital cards that you can fill out for your scenes, and they have actually what they call a cork board, a digital cork board, and you can move those scene cards around. Um, so I haven't read what you've written so far, but many times stories get stuck because the scope is too small. So you need to create more problems for your sleuth. Um, and they can be problems like emotional problems where you build up your subplot and they're involved with somebody else, or they have an opponent, not necessarily part of the mystery itself, but an opponent in life who keeps trying to keep them down. So in police procedurals, for instance, it may be someone who's in charge of their department who doesn't like them personally. There's many ways that you can um, keep that. So you want to think about opening up your scope of your story. So although you are, as the writer, are focused on getting all those clues in place to get to discovering who the killer actually was, you get to open up your story. A novel is, long. So you get to open up your story with subplots and characters that look at your suspects again and um, perhaps create more interactions with those suspects, which gives you a chance to open them up as characters and gives your sleuth and your reader a chance to interact with those characters and put in some complications about, were they the one, weren't they one, did they slip up when they said something? Um, let's see. Let me think a second. Um, you can throw in a fight scene, uh, or you can throw in something more like having to turn in a drug dealing teenager, or getting information from her that leads the sleuth to your suspect. So I would say before you continue on with your mystery that you look at expanding it out so you have more. You have more things happening. Doesn't mean you need more characters, particularly if you have, say, 5 suspects. It just means you need more interaction um, for your sleuth. A novel does give you a lot of room to develop subplots, and the subplots that parallel and often interfere with the sleuth success. So I would take a look at developing subplots. I know when I am doing my notes, which is kind of a basic outline, I have subplot A, subplot B, and just create a whole arc for that subplot, and then figure out where to put those different progress along that arc of the subplot, where to put those in your overall story so they aren't all jammed together in one place. Anyway, help hope that helps you get unstuck. Everybody gets stuck at some point in time, so don't feel alone. Just do some brainstorming about how you can expand everything. And then a little more about planning your story. In the show notes, I have a link to an interview with Joe Nesbo, who's written a number of crime thrillers, and how he goes about planning his story. So that'll be in the show notes for today's episode. Anyway, the plan gives you confidence. It's once you have your overall outline, plan, story beats, whatever you want to call it, and however you work. If you do that plan, it gives you a lot more confidence when you're writing because you know what you're going to write in that scene. characters do things that you don't do and say things that you don't expect when you're writing a scene. But one of the ways you can keep your character in check is to know the goal of each of those scenes. So I find that planning really helps a lot. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions here. No. All right, and I do encourage questions. I love questions. So every week before the show, you can leave me comments on Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus of questions that you have about writing a mystery, because I know it's very challenging, and mystery writing has some challenges that are unique to the genre. So it's quite challenging to write a mystery. So then going back to your sleuth and bringing your reader on board and bringing them on as the parallel invisible sleuth, that's trying to solve that mystery. One of the great ways to do that, as I mentioned before, is bringing them on board with your sleuth and making that sleuth an engaging character. So I thought I'd read a little from Nelson DeMille. Whoops, I always do this backwards on screen. Nelson DeMille's The General's Daughter, which is a great mystery. If you haven't read it, I do recommend it as a great mystery to read. It has a lot of fun in it, as well as a really super mystery and a lot of characters who really flummox the sleuth. So let's meet him. This is chapter 1. All right. Is this seat taken? I asked the attractive young woman sitting by herself in the lounge. She looked up from her newspaper but didn't reply. I sat opposite her at the cocktail table and put down my book. She went back to her paper and sipped her drink, a bourbon and coke. I inquired, "Come here often?" "Go away." "What's your sign?" "No trespassing." "Don't I know you from somewhere?" "No." "Yes, NATO headquarters in Brussels. We met at a cocktail party." "Perhaps you're right," she conceded. "You got drunk and threw up in the punch bowl." "Small world," I said. Okay, this is the first half a page. We aren't even to the bottom of the page yet. And we know a lot about the sleuth. The sleuth makes wisecracks. He's self-assured, and he screws up. We got that all in half a page. So we have some of those main characteristics of getting the reader involved with the sleuth from the very beginning. And I'm going to skip a couple of pages. It does turn out that she was the one that threw up in the punch bowl, and he gets turned down, of course. But then, so now we're on page 5. I just want to give you an idea of how this goes. So they have an interaction. He goes where he needs to go, and then he shares a little bit about himself. So always make sure that backstory isn't the first thing that you give out, that you have some scene that brings your reader into the story right away. Because if they don't get past page 1 or 2, they aren't going to get any further. That's just how it goes. So here's his background, because now we know he's a wise ass, and he, likes women, but he hasn't been so successful with them. So he says up front, my job. I'm an officer in the United States Army. My rank is unimportant. And in my line of work, it's also secret. I'm in the Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, and in the Army, which is rank conscious. The best rank to have is no rank. But in fact, like most CID personnel, I am a warrant officer, a special rank that exists between non-commissioned officers and commissioned officers. This is a pretty good rank because you have the most privileges of an officer, but not much of the command responsibility or the Mickey Mouse crap that goes along with it. Warrant officers are addressed as Mr., and CID investigators often wear civilian clothing, as I was that evening. These are times when I even have illusions that I'm a civilian. So you know a lot more about him. You know his official role as a detective, and you know that he goes undercover. So these are all things that like bring the reader in, and I'm like, oh. So he's peeling away the layers of who he is. This is a very good mystery, so I do recommend it for reading. All right, this is Mystery Monday, and I'm Zara Altair, and I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to end for today, but I'll be back next week on Monday, and I hope you join me. And also, there are links in the show notes to the interview with Joe Nesbo, which is really fascinating, a very fascinating, it's a very thoughtful writer. And also there's a link to The General's Daughter if you haven't read it. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.